Morning, folks, and welcome to today's episode called Gautam Adani, from diamond trader to billionaire tycoon. So he was once the second richest man on earth, richer than Bezos, then Arno, then Buffett, and this just a few years ago. He left school at 15, and over the last 50 years, he has built a huge empire spanning ports and power plants and airports, and his success, it's fueled by a mixture of risk, relentlessness, and a powerful friendship with India's Prime Minister. Now, I knew about Adani for a while, but it's only when I mentioned him briefly when I was talking about the Hindenburg Group in the episode on short sellers that I thought I'd love to cover this guy and his story. Man, it is so well worth it. There's obviously billions and billions of dollars, there's kidnapping, there's a terror attack, there's lots of alleged corruption, but there's also huge amount of business building. I mean, this guy is very impressive. It's a cracking episode. Enjoy. So, Adani, he was born on June 24th, 1962 in, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Ahmedabad in the state of Gujarat. That's on the west coast of India. He was the seventh of 8 children. Middle class family. His father ran a small textile business. So, business and trade, margins, they're all part of young Adani's everyday life. He wasn't too much into books. He was restless. He was curious. His family had a nickname for him. They called him Tufani, which means stormy, because he had this energy. He was always hustling. By 16, he'd had enough of school, and in 1978 packed his bags and headed to Mumbai to live with his older brother Vinud. His first job was sorting diamonds that were going to be used for cutting and polishing. And this part of the diamond business, with its razor-thin margins and fast cycles of buying and selling across borders, it more or less honed Adani's financial instincts and his tolerance for risk. And by 1979, he started a small brokerage with 2 cousins trading diamonds. Within a year, he made his first million rupees in profits. That's about $125,000. So not bad for a teenager. And yet, despite the success, in 1982, he left the diamond trade and Mumbai because he saw that there was bigger opportunities in his home state of Gujarat, as India's industrial economy was starting to pick up. So he joined a small plastics factory that his elder brother had bought the year before, and by all accounts, Adani, he threw himself into the work, modernising operations, expanding sales at his factory. And there's a story from those years that really captures his hustle. So he was chasing business from Reliance Industries. Back then, that was India's fastest growing textile business. And Reliance needed huge quantities of packaging, and Adani wanted those orders. So he befriended Reliance's purchasing manager and then made a point of meeting him every morning. And in doing so, learning what the competitors were quoting, and then he'd undercut every one of them. And as business grew, Adani realised that the real bottleneck, it wasn't in sales. And in fairness, when you had the kind of chutzpah that Adani had, sales come easy to these kind of guys. The real choke point was in PVC resin, the raw material. It was scarce in India's insulated, state-controlled economy, because back then there was a system in India called the License Raj, which really tightly controlled foreign trade. You had to jump through hoops of bureaucracy, call in favours, have the right connections just to get a license. And as you can imagine, Adani, he was relentless, working the phones, calling in every connection, exploiting every loophole. And his timing was pretty good. The government had just started loosening import rules for a handful of key materials to keep the factories running. So he and his brother got the license. And then, combined with additional liberalised import rules that came into effect in 1982, Adani, with a work ethic that people close to him describe as almost frenetic, he personally negotiated deals from petrochemical hubs like Japan and South Korea, and then worked around the clock to get shipments, allocated to manufacturers across India. So again, for context, because the context is important here, back then India's economy, we're talking about the mid-80s, this liberalisation, it was still limited, but entrepreneurs like Adani, who seized the opportunities that were there, they could establish control in their particular sectors very quickly. So Adani, he seized the opportunity and he began diversifying. And busy as he was, he still managed to find time to get married to a dentist from Mumbai in 1986, and they had 2 sons. In 1988, then he set up Adani Exports, and this is the company that would become the Adani Group, and it began trading in plastics, agricultural goods, power equipment, and fertilizers, areas where Adani saw high growth potential. And in its first year, Adani Exports recorded a turnover of 2.2 crore. That's roughly about $1.3 million. And the revenue grew at a very fast rate over the coming years, helped by 2 things. First of all, government-backed institutions like the Gujarat State Export Corporation, they help new exporters with financing and with contracts. But more importantly was Adani's drive. I use the word relentless in relation to him because that's the word you hear when anybody is describing him. And he also found a formula that worked for him. Trading in products that had high volume, low margin, fast turnover, and of course, done with absolute confidence. And then in 1992, a deal that didn't happen had a huge impact and actually laid the foundations for what became the success of Adani. So Adani did a deal with the American agribusiness giant Cargill to build this huge salt farm along the coastline of Mundra. This is Western India as well. And it was going to have a private jetty. However, Cargill pulled out after protests over foreign control of India's coastline. And Adani also, he wasn't really happy with the deal because Cargill would end up owning 89% and he'd have just 11%. But despite the deal collapsing, Adani decided to go ahead. But instead of building salt farms, he was going to build a port. You see, his own trading business at this stage was being really, really hampered by delays at government-controlled ports, because all the ports back then were government-controlled. So it was costing him up to about 10 crore a year, about $3.5 million back then. So he realised that if he owned his own infrastructure, it would give him far greater control. And this really set in process another addition to his formula. Remember, it was high volume, low margin, fast turnover. Well, added to this now was Adani's vision to have complete control over the delivery of his goods. And of course, he had no experience in building or running a port, and Mundra didn't start off as a huge port at all. It opened in 1998, and its early years, it was very humble. It was just had a single berth handling salt and fertilizer shipments. But India's economy was growing, and importers and ship owners, they were looking for alternatives to the very congested and I suppose inefficient ports in Kandla and Mumbai. So over the years, Adani, he kept building and expanding the Mundra port, modernising it, and today that port, the Mundra port, is responsible for 11% of all of India's imports by sea. It controls nearly 33% of India's container traffic. And it's fair to say that the Mundra port formed the cornerstone of Adani's future growth and success. And the group now has 13 ports in total. So Adani, he was building a very, very successful business. And in doing so, it appears that he came to the attention of some very, very dangerous people. Because on January the 1st, 1998, Adani and an associate were leaving a business dinner when they were kidnapped by gunmen linked to this notorious mobster called Bablu Srivastava. And again, I know I'm probably butchering these names. Now, I looked up this guy. He's currently in jail, but at one stage, he was wanted in 42 cases involving murder and abduction. So, definitely not a guy to be messed with. Now, Adani and his associate were released unharmed the next day. And although it's never been confirmed, a ransom of about $2 million is believed to have been paid. And here's a quote from Adani in relation to that kidnapping, and it gives you a really good idea of his temperament. It's my nature to adapt to things as quickly as possible. It's not in me to lose my peace over what's not in our control. I was kidnapped and released the next day. I tell you that I slept well that very night. So, very cool, very calm, very collected guy. In 1999, he launched a coal trading arm. Again, he was betting early on India's growing demand for power. And of course, it all played into his vision for controlling every aspect of his business. Because As he saw it, and rightly so, power is a part of infrastructure. Turnover jumped from 150 crore, that's about $53 million in 1992, to 2,853 crore, that's 660 million by 1999, so just 7 years, like over a tenfold increase. And by 2006, Adani had become India's largest coal importer. That same year, he founded Adani Power and began building a massive thermal plant near Mundra. And now I know I'm jumping ahead a bit, but if I were to detail every single business that this guy got into, we'd be here for hours. Now, by the late 2000s, Adani was being hailed as one of India's fastest rising billionaires. And in 2008, he made his first major international move. And as you can imagine, for someone who wants to control every element of his business, as his coal importing business started to thrive, he wanted to own the coal. So he bought the huge Bunyu coal mine in Indonesia for $1.6 billion. But that same year, 2008, saw another hugely dramatic event in Adani's and in India's life. So it's the night of November 26th, 2008. Inside the Taj Mahal Palace Hotel in Mumbai, Adani has just finished dinner with some business associates. He's paid the bill and was about to walk out into the hotel lobby when his companion suggested staying for another round of coffee. He agreed, and that probably saved his life, because seconds later, terrorists stormed the lobby, opening fire indiscriminately. Adani could see them from his seat in the restaurant. As he said himself, "I saw death at a distance of just 15 feet. Now, the hotel staff very, very quickly hustled Adani and all the other restaurant guests through a back door, into the kitchen, then down into the basement, where they stayed for over 2 hours. Over 100 people crouched together in the dark, breathing stale air. After 2 hours, the basement, it just grows too suffocating, so the staff move everyone again up to the chamber hall, an upper floor thought to be a bit safer. Some people hide under sofas, others pray. Adani recalled sitting on a sofa, trying to calm those around him by telling them to have faith in God. Now, after a failed rescue attempt that led to some of the hotel staff being shot dead, at around 8:45 a.m. the following morning, commandos managed to cordon off the hotel and secure this safe exit, and they eventually made it out. 31 people had been killed in the hotel. Now, a tragic event, but I think what it shows us about Adani, and what I like about Adani from this episode, is not only the calmness, but also the fact that he never made this hugely dramatic and obviously traumatic experience about him. Whenever asked about it, he always expresses real profound gratitude for the dedication and the heroism of the hotel staff. Forgive the quick interruption, but I want to let you know about our subscription service. For just $1.99 a month, you get every weekly episode completely ad-free, so you can enjoy the story without any interruptions. Subscribers also unlock a library of special episodes from when Keith was still co-hosting with me, including a 3-part deep dive on Disney and a 2-parter on Guinness. They're brilliant. Now, Keith isn't part of the show anymore, but I still have a good few hour-long episodes that I recorded with him, and they're going to be released on the 1st of every month over the next few months, again, for subscribers only. All of that for just $1.99 a month. If you'd like to join, it's really simple. On Spotify, just tap on the little lock symbol next to the bonus episodes in the feed. On Apple Podcasts, click on the show and you'll see the option to subscribe. Or if you prefer Patreon, head to patreon.com/Great Business Stories. There's also a link in the About section at the top of the podcast page to the Patreon page. And of course, if subscribing isn't for you right now, that's grand. Following the show and telling a friend about it is a huge help. Alright, back to the story. Now, over the coming years, Adani continued to expand at a huge rate. Between 2010 and 2013, he spent over $4 billion in Australia buying a coal mine and port. The power plant in Mundra, it becomes the largest power station of its kind in the world. Revenue surged to 47,000 crore, about 8.7 billion, nearly triple what they'd been 6 years earlier. But the company's borrowings were even bigger at $11.3 billion. Now, if all of this growth seems to be happening at a fast pace, Adani was only starting because his business really became turbocharged with the election of Narendra Modi as India's Prime Minister. And it's this marriage of Adani's business and Modi's rise to power that is central to this whole story. So let's take a quick look at the background to that relationship. In early 2002, Gujarat, the state that they both came from, it was torn apart by these communal riots in which over 1,000 people, mostly Muslims, were killed. Now, Modi was just months into his first term as chief minister of the state, and he was facing national outrage and isolation as a result of these riots and the deaths. India's business elite, they were keeping their distance from him. But Adani, along with a small circle of Gujarati industrialists, they saw an opportunity, and they helped form the Resurgent Group of Gujarat. It was a business lobby that rallied around Modi. So they were pitching stability and growth over scandal, and their partnership would become one of the most consequential but definitely controversial in modern Indian politics and capitalism. I think the key to understanding their relationship is looking at how aligned they have been over the last 23 years or so. Because the glue that binds them together, it's a shared vision for where India can go and how it can get there. And infrastructure is key to this. And look, I'm not positing this as some sort of higher cause. Of course, they're also doing this out of self-interest. But I do think that they believe, the two of them, that by working together, they can get the job done better, quicker. And it's always been a mutually beneficial relationship. Modi has helped Adani's business, and Adani's business successes helped the Gujarat state become very prosperous, which in turn helped Modi become president of India in 2014. Now, critics have rightly accused Modi's government of bending rules to smooth Adani's path, amending regulations, easing clearances, awarding contracts, and nowhere is this more evident. I mean, there's loads of examples, but nowhere is it more evident than in February 2019. The government auctions 6 airports. Internal government records revealed that the Finance Ministry had objected to one bidder taking more than 2 airports, citing high financial risk and performance issues. And yet Adani wins all 6 airports without any experience of owning or running an airport. Now, as I said, there's lots of more examples of this type of cronyism, but that is just one very, very crystal clear example. So between 2014 and 2022, the Adani Group's value rocketed from 8 billion to 288 billion. By now, the company is split into 4 parts. You have ports, power, transmission, and the parent company. And it wasn't just in India. I already mentioned investments in Indonesia and Australia. Well, they made another huge investment in Australia, a coal and rail facility for 16.5 billion. So by now it had become a truly international conglomerate. In September 2022, when its share price peaked, Adani's personal net worth reached 155 billion. In doing so, this catapulted him to the position of the world's second richest man. So taking over Jeff Bezos and Bernard Arnault. But of course, the worst thing about peaking is that there can be a very steep and dangerous fall. And the first taste of this came just a month earlier, in August 2022, when a research company called Credit Sites, they released a report that warned that the Adani Group was deeply over-leveraged because we mentioned their borrowings. And they even cautioned a worst-case scenario of default if its expansion continued unchecked. Now, Adani brushed it aside. He said scale and speed are essential for India's development. That's what he told Bloomberg. And he insisted that the group's internal controls were robust. But he wasn't able to brush aside the next report that landed with a fairly big thump on January 24th, 2023, when US short seller Hindenburg Research, they published a 32,000 word report that accused the Adani Group of, and I quote, pulling the largest con in corporate history. So this was the result of a 2-year investigation, and one of its central allegations was that Adani's older brother, Vinud, that he ran this vast network of offshore cell companies in Mauritius, and these entities were used to manipulate, i.e. inflate, share prices. Now, the report also highlighted that the group's key listed companies were on a precarious financial footing due to, as we mentioned, substantial debt, much of it secured by pledging their inflated stock as collateral. Because remember, they are accusing the company of inflating their stock through these Mauritius companies. What I found even more surprising about the report when it was released is that most of the allegations in the report had already been in the public domain. For example, the charge that they were manipulating stock through these shady entities in Mauritius. There were reports of this 2 years previously, and the market regulator in India had started looking into it. But then the case went quiet. What made the Hindenburg Group really stand out wasn't really what they said, but simply the fact that all of the different allegations, dubious practices that had been said about Adani were now concentrated in a single report, and it looked pretty damning. So the political opposition, they seized the moment, accusing the government of cronyism and weak oversight. Within 48 hours, the group's market value had fallen by 50 billion. Adani's own fortune dropped by more than 20 billion, knocking him out of the world's top 10 richest. Inside the group's headquarters, they had a crisis war room was set up, and Adani's team called the report bogus and maliciously mischievous and a calculated attack on India, and again I quote, on the independence, integrity and quality of Indian institutions. And then their CFO appeared on television calling it a lie and assuring investors the company's finances were sound. And right beside him as he made his TV appearance was a large Indian flag. Now look, I get why Adani would be pissed. The timing of the Hindenburg report seems to have been pretty calculated to do maximum damage, because the company was just 3 days away from a massive 20,000 crore or $2.5 billion follow-on public offering. And this equity sale, which was the largest ever in India at the time, was a test of investor faith. But of course, it was also vital because it was raising funds that the company really, really needed to pay off some of its huge debts. So yeah, I get why they're pissed, but the Hindenburg report wasn't some geopolitical hit job, despite what Adani and his supporters would say. It was an activist short seller doing what they do, finding issues, highlighting them, and profiting if they're right. Adani wasn't being singled out because it was Indian. It was being treated like any other major global conglomerate under scrutiny. And look, here's the thing, when a company like Adani claims to be a world-class multinational, it has to accept that it's going to come under scrutiny. Hindenburg's questions about leverage, about share price manipulation, and about the regulatory oversight, they were all very, very legitimate questions. They weren't insults to India's integrity. They were tests of transparency. And the report did expose issues with the oversight in India. And Adani's reaction, this framing it as an attack on the nation, like turning corporate criticism into this kind of national grievance, it doesn't help. It doesn't make you look strong. It makes you look weak. Like, standing tall means answering the questions, not hiding behind a flag. I just thought it was pathetic, and it didn't serve them well. Now, 3 days after Hindenburg's report, Adani pressed ahead with the 2.5 billion share sale, but of course, by now the stock was sinking. The offer was priced above market, and even though they did manage to get across the line, investors who had committed to it were now looking at big losses, so the company had to reverse course and refund the cash. A few days later, Adani put out a 413-page report to counter the Hindenburg accusations, but it didn't have much of an impact, because over the next few weeks the group's market value dropped by 150 billion and Adani's wealth was halved. Regulators, of course, scrambled to contain the fallout. In March, India's Supreme Court ordered an expert panel to review the allegations and to assess whether regulators had failed. 2 months later, the panel flagged suspect trading patterns and weak enforcement, but gave up their investigation when the country's market regulator admitted to drawing a blank in its investigation. Now, the regulator's chair was subsequently accused of holding stakes in an offshore entity used by Adani's family. So if you're thinking this all looks a bit shady, I'm in agreement with you here, because then in August 2023, the Amsterdam-based Organised Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, or OCCRP, this is a non-profit news group, they dug into those very strange Mauritius companies. You know, the companies that were controlled by Adani's older brother. Well, the OCCPR found that two Adani family associates secretly pumped hundreds of millions of dollars into Adani stocks through those Mauritius funds between 2013 and 2018, effectively shoring up prices. The report highlighted a 2014 letter from India's Revenue Intelligence Chief warning the regulators that Adani-linked funds might be manipulating stock prices. And that warning seemed to vanish once Modi took office. So, yeah, shady to say the least. Now, it wasn't all doom and gloom for Adani, because as the share price was falling, a Florida-based investment boutique called GQG Partners, it was led by Rajiv Jain, they invested $1.87 billion in buying Adani shares on the open market. And so that deal lifted sentiment and Adani shares rebounded. They recovered about $15 billion. And throughout 2023, the Adani Group, it focused on repairing its pretty damaged image. So they repaid over $2 billion in loans. They quietly cut back on spending. They improved disclosures somewhat. And they shored up liquidity by selling stakes in certain assets. So the message was pretty clear. You know, discipline was replacing expansion, exuberance. Yet at the same time, big gaps still remained between, you know, Adani's denials and the questions raised by researchers and journalists. And just when it looked like they'd weathered the worst of the storm, the real blow landed. This was 20th of November 2024. The US Department of Justice, they unsealed a 5-count indictment charging Gautam Adani personally, his nephew, and 6 others with bribery, securities fraud, and wire fraud. Prosecutors allege Adani paid $265 million in bribes to Indian officials to secure solar deals. And apparently, the US prosecutors, they have some pretty damning evidence. They have phone records that had details of the bribes actually being offered to the officials. They had Excel spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentations that outlined how the bribes were going to benefit the company. And I love this. There's records that show some of the other defendants referred to Adani as Mr. A, Numero Uno, and the big man. I mean, this is amateur hour. Leaving evidence of your bribery so open, on phones, on Excel spreadsheets, on PowerPoint presentations. But I'm guessing they were so careless because in India, they've been untouchable. It's pretty apparent that they've never come under any type of scrutiny in India. And they never thought for a minute that the US would be looking into their affairs. But this is a stark reminder that once you start borrowing money in a foreign country, you are now playing by their rules. Because this is the very reason why the US were looking into them, because Adani had raised over $3 billion in loans and bond offerings from US investors while concealing the bribery. And this isn't some sort of governance squabble. This is a criminal case. This has a direct impact on his reputation, on his ability to travel, and to access international debt markets. But surprisingly, or maybe not so surprisingly, there's a good chance that Adani, like lots of other billionaires caught doing something wrong, will be able to settle these charges without conviction because, under the US security laws, the accused can negotiate with US regulators and pay a fine without admitting any guilt. So you can be caught bribing officials, but if you have the means, you're good to go. I mean, we wonder why people are so disillusioned. So what to make of Adani? I mean, there's a lot about the guy that I like. Despite his huge wealth, he lives a very grounded life. By all accounts, his daily routine includes family time for meals, although I do question that, seems though he seems to be a workaholic, and he unwinds by playing cards with his wife. He does distrust overly complex, jargon-filled analysis, and while he's relentless and restless and always pushing, by all accounts, he treats those around him fairly. And I made reference to the way he spoke of the hotel staff after terrorist attacks. I mean, that's a small detail, but to me an important one, because it's these kind of details that give us an idea of his character. And again, he's a very private man, it's hard to know, but he does come across as a very grounded and, for a multi-billionaire, a pretty humble kind of guy. But then on the other hand, or on the other side of the scale, there are the allegations of cronyism, corruption, bribery. And yeah, for the most part, they're just allegations, but I mean, the body of evidence over the last 30 years is hard to ignore. Now, Adani believes he's helping India and its people, that he gets things done, that he's pushing the country to compete on a global stage. And I really think he does believe that, even as he builds, of course, a vast fortune for himself. And in the short term, his achievements have brought growth and ambition to India. India has progressed massively with the help of him. And so a lot of people in India are rightly very proud of their achievements and very proud of Adani's involvement in those achievements. But the end doesn't justify the means. Like corruption, cronyism, bribery, they erode public trust. They erode faith in the very idea of fairness. And so when the foundations of progress are built on what are very compromised foundations, it will inevitably affect not just the democratic well-being of a country, but will also have a very negative long-term impact on its progress. We've seen this in countries that have still not gotten out of this whole cronyism and corruption. You need to move beyond that to make real progress. But the story of Adani, the ambition, the massive achievements, and now the accountability, they make for such a great business story. And with that, we come to listeners' emails. And I love this one from Leonard, who wrote, I really enjoyed the episode on the browser war and your analysis on why Gates released all of that incriminating material to the government. One other reason he did it, I think, is linked to the fact that email was very new back then, and I don't think he realised how damaging those emails would be. Fantastic point, Leonard. I think you're absolutely right. That is another good reason why Gates released all the material. And thanks for that insight. And remember, if you have any comments, any corrections, or any story that you'd like us to cover, email me at info@gbspod.com. All the best, folks.